Welcome to another edition of 1 in 15. As ever, I'll get my guests to introduce themselves.
I'm Sally Nash. I'm a researcher, author, teacher, lecturer, trainer, and an Anglican priest. And I work in areas of youth work, ministry, paediatric spiritual care, chaplaincy, and shame at the moment.
Excellent. It's really great to have you today, Sally. Thank you for your time. And I know enough about you to know that what felt like a long introduction in terms of what you do is scraping the surface. As you know, we're talking in this series about what one big thing that's dominating people's thinking. What is that for you at the moment?
The concept of new normal.
Yeah.
I first came across the idea of new normal when I was doing some research into children and young people who have cancer. And there was a lot of talk in that sort of context about finding a new normal for people. I found myself having to find a new normal in that I'm now on study leave, having with fairly short notice ended up no longer doing the job that I've held for just over 20 years. So I'm in that sort of, I need to find a new normal phase, but I really don't like the term new normal.
Okay. And it's certainly a phrase that a lot of us would have been familiar with. It's been bandied about a lot. I share your kind of ness about it. I mean, what is it about the phrase that you don't find helpful?
I think one of the things is I suppose I've never felt that I'm normal. I think I probably don't like the opposite as abnormal.
Sure.
But the idea of normal feels a little bit to me as if it's constraining. It's about conformity, and it holds sorts of resonances for me, which I don't find terribly helpful, really.
Okay. So there's something about it that feels maybe it's too constraining, that when we're being asked to adapt to a new normal, we're being asked to adapt to a particular way of doing, being, thinking. Is that the sort of angle you're coming from?
Yeah, the idea of new normal sometimes feels like something's being imposed. So all the various messages one gets about the virus, the little catchphrases, it feels like someone's trying to impose something on us. Not that I'm not pretty good at complying with some of those things, but the way it's done sometimes, I think, leaves people feeling a little bit like someone's trying to control them, not treat them like an adult, and not engage in any sort of proper dialogue. It's not, in a sense, it's not a dialogue. It's sort of a one-way instruction.
Yeah, I get that. I think there's that sense of it being imposed, isn't there? Of what it is. It's just that, and you've just got to deal with it, kind of thing. And with my coach hat on, I'm really conscious that if I'm talking to somebody in a coaching context and they're talking about how things are, my instinct as a coach is always to challenge their perception of how things are, what control they've got, because they might think they've got more control than they have, or they might think they've got less control than they have, to kind of negotiate that space and to not accept the way things are just because somebody, even if that somebody is ourselves, has told us that's how it is.
Yeah, issues of agency and control, I think, are quite important to me, and I think one of the things I find difficult about the idea of new normal is that it feels I don't always have agency. I haven't chosen to be where I am. It's a sort of unexpected and an unwanted place to be, and and I'm supposed to sort of come to terms with that.
Yeah, I guess there is a double-edged swordness to that, isn't there? I mean, because sometimes that way of thinking of accepting that things are what they are at the moment is a really positive and proactive step, isn't it? I'm thinking of my own mental health history when it's been poor, kind of accepting the things that I can do as well as the things that I can't do, and being realistic about that, but not choosing not to lock myself into that, because it might not be the same this afternoon, or it might not be the same tomorrow or this time next month. So there is a power, I guess, if we're being as generous as I know instinctively both of us would like to be. There's the new normal phrase is maybe something about it, about saying, helping people make a transition from the old way of living to whatever the new way of living might be. but there is definitely that other side of the coin, the other side edge of the sword to go with it as well.
Yeah, I think as someone with a sort of youth working type background, I think one of the dilemmas I have with new normal is it sometimes feels like it operates in a deficit, not an asset model.
Yeah.
And often when you talk to people about new normal, it's in a sense inherent in that concept is a range of losses that
Yeah.
someone's experienced, and you're sort of, to me, almost trying to tell them, get over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
To get into new normal, and the and perhaps sometimes you're not allowed the time and space to grieve and lose and in a sense move on in your own pace and time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I think that's really important. I've been having conversations with a number of church leaders lately, and leaders of kind of businesses and charities and things. And one of the things I'm saying to them is, you know, that we had a way of doing things, and some of those things are no longer possible. Some of those things that we did, actually, if we'd had a magic wand to wave at, we would have wanted a way of getting rid of them anyway, because they were things we did because it was how we used to do things. So there's a load of potential in the new way of doing things. And there's also, it's like unexplored territory. It's a blank piece of paper, which frightens some people and energizes others of that, you know, what is the possibility here? How can we, you know, what are the things in our business, in our personal life, in our relationships that we've had to put down that actually we don't want to pick up? You know, we might feel some pressure to pick up again, but we don't want to pick up. And what are the things that we've started to do differently that actually have promise and have potential to grow into something new and beautiful and powerful and strong? And there's quite that tension there, isn't it? And I guess there's, for me, again, that new normal is, it feels like a product, you know, it feels like a done thing, and that you implicitly we're meant to understand it. Whereas actually for me, it's like, well, I don't know what my new normal is going to be yet. It's way too early for me to define those parameters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are definitely some positives for me. I'm not doing a 2-hour commute a day when I go to work, so that's a real positive. I've never lived anywhere close to where I've worked, so that I can see the benefits of not doing all the driving that I have to. I can see the benefits environmentally, as well as personally. And so I agree, there are definitely some things that change that are definitely positive, and I think are globally much more useful. And the whole thing about trusting people to work at home, and some of the things that are emerging in this new phase, I think are really good for people. So I think there are some positives. I now have a back garden I can live in because of lockdown. Because Paul wanted to be out there, they're doing it. So there are definitely some new good things that are emerging. I think it's partly the I think most of us need some accompaniment in transition. And when transitions are forced on us with no accompaniment and no support to help us think through and process, I think that's particularly difficult. And I think that's why I sort of laugh with the idea of new norms. It often just seems to be presented in a way that, you know, you do need to accept it without people accompanying you on the journey, enable you to get there emotionally as well as cognitively, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, we've talked in other interviews with people about the idea that we're in a liminal time, and you know, in a place of where the old way of doing things is no longer accessible, but the new normal isn't yet defined, and that is, it can be quite, you know, it can equally be a scary place or a place full of potential and creativity. But we know as a species we're not great with change. We're certainly not great with change that's been enforced upon us, that we don't feel like we've instigated. And we also have this kind of weird history idea, don't we, where all the great change in history happened overnight and everyone adjusted to them at the same pace really, really easily. But we know that humanity is much messier than that. We know that we're much messier than that as individuals. How can we wrestle with this? Like, you know, this phrase is out there and we can challenge it and we can be grumpy about it. And I've certainly been grumpy about it. occasionally. But how can we engage with it more positively, or are there other ways of trying to capture it that are more freeing, more liberating than new normal seems to be?
I'm sort of trying to reflect on the concept of prevailing conditions at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a sailor, because I get hideously seasick. I'd love to be a sailor, but I would be thrown up every 30 seconds. But I'm just very aware for my friends who do sail, the wind and tides and so many things are important. And even just with things like doing a bit of walking on places like Dartmoor, have to be completely aware of prevailing conditions and adjust in the light of the prevailing conditions. And I suppose I like the idea of adjusting to prevailing conditions, because it implies that things are changing, whereas new normal sounds a little bit too static for me. So I'm playing more with the idea of prevailing conditions as a way of sort of thinking about how I adjust to my my new situations. At the moment, I'm on study leave in autumn, which I love as a season. So it's a great opportunity to go out and think and walk and do all those sorts of things. And I'm aware that I'm also looking for work in a time which is challenging, because there are many people who are losing work, people reflecting on what might work look like for the future, how are things going to be different. So I suppose I'm more engaged with the concept of prevailing conditions, because it enables me to think about a wide range of different conditions as well. One of my favourite little bits of theory that I love teaching is Thompson's PCS model, where you talk about personal, cultural and structural. And if I think about things like prevailing conditions, there are things that are very personal to me. There are cultural issues, but there are also structural issues that I need to take into account. If I don't take into account all those three levels, then I'm not thinking through probably everything that I need to about the situation I'm finding myself in. And I suppose I think a lot of concepts are presented in the way that we respond to personally, whereas I suppose I believe that change largely comes, well, it does come through thinking through things personally, but change often comes through challenging and things culturally and structurally.
Sure. Yeah, I love, I'm going to steal that metaphor totally, that prevailing conditions, because I'm thinking straight away it's much more freeing. It builds into the idea that if you're in an uncomfortable period, it's not where you're going to be forever. You're not locked into it in the way that new normal can feel like. And like you, I'm not a sailor. I'm not great. I haven't really got good sea legs. But I do know that sometimes if you're on a boat and you're in a storm, sometimes you race away from it, and sometimes you steer into it. And because a good sailor will know which is the wise option. Or using one of your other hobbies, if you're going for a long walk, you pack for the weather that's there, but you bear in mind what weather might be coming around the corner. And to have those resources, you're not going to use all of those resources at the same time. To know that there's going to be different times, different seasons where hope is more accessible, seasons where it feels really dark, seasons where you've got a lot of energy, seasons where you've perhaps got no energy at all. But to know that all of those will be times. As a coach, I would also echo back something you said earlier about not trying to do that thinking or that awareness in a vacuum, but of having somebody around you. It might be a coach, it might be a friend, a therapist, or what have you, a work colleague, but somebody who can help you recognize what's really going on, maybe notice for you some of the things that you're missing, and help you notice how to use those resources to stay strong in the moment and to prevail with the prevailing conditions as they change. That's a really interesting metaphor. I'm definitely going to steal that.
Right. Well, that's what we all do, isn't it? That's what most of my writing is taking concepts and things I've seen, and I mean, I love research. And what you really do when you're researching with people is you take what they say and play and build concepts with it. So I think the series you're doing is really helpful for that, because it brings in new ways of thinking and looking at things, and then that helps us adjust our own way of thinking. So I think it's yeah, definitely up for you pinching that, and because I know that I've pinched lots of ideas from other people too.
Excellent. Well, Sally, we've run out of time, but I love that. We've got a place of hope that, you know, whatever the new normal might become, and however uncomfortable and unhelpful that phrase is, that actually that sense of using a different metaphor, using prevailing conditions to recognize what's going on, to maybe admit the things that are hard that we're pretending aren't, but also to recognize where the hope is and the possibility. That's a really helpful thing to take forward. Sally Coleman, you've been a fantastic guest. Sally Nash, sorry, different person. Sally Nash, been a fantastic guest. Thank you very much for your time today.
Right, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Great fun. Thank you. Okay.